He didn't hesitate. When the bullet tore through the storm, he moved first, one leap, one heartbeat, and everything changed. In a world built on betrayal, he stood between death and the man who had always believed in him. No orders, no second chances, just a choice. They thought he was just another weapon, trained to serve and forget. They never understood the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought, couldn't be broken. They never saw what true courage looked like until it bled out on the cold, broken ground. Before the last secret falls, before the final mask slips, remember this: he wasn't the one they counted on. He was the one they should have feared. If this story touched you, if you believe loyalty still matters in a broken world, we would love to hear your thoughts. Please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from and which moment stayed with you the most. Your voice matters here. The rain came down in cold, thin sheets, painting the city in blurred reflections of gray and silver. Beneath the creaking awning of the riverside chapel, mourners gathered in tight clusters, their umbrellas bowed under the relentless drizzle. Somewhere between the low hum of whispered condolences and the dull thud of raindrops hitting the cobblestones, Detective Malcolm Rhodes stood motionless. His dark brown skin glistened with mist, his broad frame rigid under a heavy black coat, and in his left hand the leash of his canine partner Rex hung taut. Malcolm's face was carved from stone, his jaw clenched, his eyes sharp fixed on the polished oak coffin at the center of the hall. Inside that box lay Marcus Blaze Turner, a biker, a man many called brother, some called a traitor, and a few like Malcolm barely knew beyond a handful of police reports. But something about today set Malcolm's nerves on edge. It wasn't the somber faces or the stale scent of carnations wilting in the rain. It was Rex, the dog, a lean and scarred German shepherd with one torn ear and deep amber eyes, was behaving strangely. His ears pinned back flat against his skull, his entire body tense like a coiled spring. His snout twitched as if picking up a scent no one else could perceive. When Rex gave a low, almost inaudible growl, Malcolm felt the first prick of unease. The crowd shifted uneasily as the minister cleared his throat, starting the eulogy with worn platitudes about loyalty, brotherhood, and lost souls. Malcolm barely heard it. His entire focus was on Rex and the tightening pull of the leash. A sudden, sharp flicker in the corner of Malcolm's eye made him turn. Up on the roof, attached to the chapel's old security system, the single CCTV camera flickered, sparked, and went dark. Malcolm stiffened. Coincidence? Maybe. But years in the force had taught him that coincidences at crime scenes or funerals were almost never innocent. He shifted his weight, scanning the gathering. Leather vests adorned with patches of the Hellfire's biker gang, a few tearful women clinging to each other, men with sunglasses hiding their eyes even in the rain. Outsiders stood along the perimeter, cops, informants, and a few faces Malcolm recognized from mugshots. The minister droned on, his voice losing the battle against the thickening rain. Then it happened. Rex lunged with a violent yank of the leash. He dragged Malcolm forward, barking once sharp, guttural, furious. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Heads turned. The coffin shuddered as if the bark had vibrated through the air and into the wood itself. Malcolm wrestled Rex back under control, his heart thudding against his ribs. The dog was practically vibrating with tension now, his teeth bared, his gaze locked onto someone Malcolm couldn't yet see. A few of the bikers shifted, their hands subtly moving toward their jackets. Malcolm knew that gesture. He stepped forward, pulling Rex close, speaking low and sharp into the dog's ear. "Easy, boy, not yet." The heavy doors of the chapel creaked open again, admitting a gust of rain and a man tall, wearing a long, dripping trench coat who paused at the threshold. Malcolm caught only a glimpse of his face, shadowed under the brim of a hat, but it was enough. Rex tensed harder, a low whine escaping his throat. The man moved quickly, slipping into the sea of mourners, becoming just another blurred shape among many. Malcolm tried to follow, but a rough hand landed on his shoulder. "Back off, pig," a grizzled biker growled under his breath. Malcolm's instincts flared, but he forced himself skyward. The eulogy ended in a clumsy prayer, and the mourners began filing past the coffin, paying their respects. Malcolm stayed by the back wall, Rex pressed tightly against his leg. His mind raced. A dead man, an extinguished camera, a stranger entering mid-ceremony. Nothing about this day felt clean. He watched as a few bikers murmured to each other, their eyes flicking to the stranger in the trench coat, then away too fast. Fear, Malcolm realized. Not grief, fear. A biker's daughter, no more than 10, approached the coffin holding a wilted flower. As she laid it gently across the lid, Rex let out another low growl, drawing glances from the nearby mourners. Malcolm gave the leash a sharp tug, murmuring an apology. He had to get out of here, but not before finding out what Rex had sensed. His gut told him the answer wasn't buried inside that coffin. It was alive, watching, planning. The final prayer was said. The pallbearers moved into position. As they lifted Marcus Turner's coffin, Malcolm caught it a slight tilt, a hesitation among the carriers, a sudden shift in weight not consistent with the burden they bore. His cop instincts flared. Was the body even inside? Was it something else? Rex barked again, straining toward the door. Malcolm made a decision. He pushed through the murmuring crowd, drawing a few curses and hostile looks, and moved toward the exit. Rex surged forward with a strength that nearly toppled him. Outside, the rain hit harder, washing the courtyard in a blinding sheet. Malcolm yanked the collar of his coat higher and scanned the street. There is a flicker of movement. The man in the trench coat slipping into an alley across the street. Malcolm cursed under his breath. No backup, no radio, just him and Rex against whatever had turned this funeral into a theater of deceit. He gripped the leash tighter. "Let's go, partner," he whispered, and together, they plunged into the rain. The rain still poured in thick curtains as Malcolm and Rex crossed the slippery courtyard back into the heavy air of the chapel. The crowd had thinned. Most mourners, eager to escape the storm, had already made their exit, leaving behind the scent of wet leather and stale grief. Only a few remained, exchanging wary glances, their conversations in low, guarded whispers. Malcolm tightened his grip on Rex's leash, feeling the dog's body vibrating with a nervous, barely contained energy. His eyes locked onto the polished oak coffin, now resting alone in the center of the room like a forgotten relic. Something about it gnawed at Malcolm's instincts, sharpening them to a razor's edge. He moved closer, weaving between the vacant chairs, Rex pulling slightly ahead, his nose low to the ground, his entire posture screaming focus. As they reached the casket, Rex emitted a deep, rumbling growl that rolled across the empty hall. Malcolm knelt beside the coffin, his coat soaking up the rain pooled on the floor. His hand brushed against the side, feeling the cold, smooth surface, but Rex's focus was elsewhere. The dog nosed insistently at the bottom edge where the satin drapery kissed the wood. Then, with a gentle but firm motion, he began to tug at something. Malcolm frowned. "Easy, partner," he muttered under his breath, glancing around to make sure no one was watching too closely. Rex was gnawing carefully at a small strip of fabric peeking out from under the casket's edge. A piece of a jacket, perhaps, or a pant leg. With a quiet snap of his fingers, Malcolm commanded Rex to release, then leaned closer to inspect. It wasn't just fabric. It was stained dark, the telltale sheen of blood visible even in the dim light. And there, beneath the edge of the casket, something else caught his eye. A small, almost imperceptible hole punched through the cloth. A hole far too neat to be natural. The official report had said Marcus Turner died from a single gunshot wound to the chest during a botched robbery. But this was wrong. Malcolm's heart pounded in his chest as he reached carefully under the casket. His fingers brushed against something cold, metallic shell casing lodged in the crevice where the coffin's base met the platform. Pulling it free, Malcolm turned it over in his gloved hand. It was a small caliber, not the type typically used in gang hits, and definitely not something mentioned in the crime scene report. He slipped it into an evidence bag from his coat pocket, his mind racing. Rex, meanwhile, continued his focused search. He sniffed furiously at the lower edge of the coffin, then at the floor around it, his tail rigid, his hackles slightly raised. Malcolm trusted that nose more than he trusted most humans. That nose had found missing children, uncovered hidden weapons, even sniffed out explosives under 6 feet of concrete. And right now, it was telling Malcolm that the story they'd been fed was a lie. He rose to his feet, surveying the room again. The security guards posted at the entrance were chatting idly, oblivious. The minister had disappeared, probably into some back room to dry off or find solace in a flask. The remaining bikers were clustered by the door, throwing occasional glances in Malcolm's direction, their postures defensive, guarded. He knew he had to be careful. Too much prying could get him thrown out or worse. Quietly, he moved alongside the coffin, letting Rex lead. As they circled the casket, Rex stopped abruptly at the head, his nose pointing directly at the pillow where the deceased's head should have rested. Malcolm leaned in, pretending to adjust the draping cloth, and what he saw made his breath catch. Just beneath the fold of the collar, barely hidden by the shirt, was another dark stain smaller than the chest wound but distinct. Malcolm's hands moved quickly, his body shielding the action from view. With the edge of a pen, he lifted the shirt slightly, a second bullet hole just below the jawline, hidden expertly under makeup and fabric. A double tap, a signature hit. Executions were done that way, one shot to kill, another to ensure. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong, this was deliberate, targeted, planned. And if Marcus Turner had been marked for death, the question wasn't who had shot him anymore, it was who wanted to make sure no one ever knew. Rex whined softly, nudging Malcolm's knee with his snout. Malcolm dropped the cloth and straightened, forcing himself to breathe normally. Every instinct screamed that he was being watched. The man in the trench coat was gone. Had he ever truly been there? Or was it just another ghost in this house of mourning? He couldn't be sure, but Rex's behavior confirmed it. Something rotten lay beneath this funeral's somber surface. Malcolm pulled his phone from his pocket, snapping a few discreet pictures of the coffin, the stains, the hole in the cloth. He couldn't trust sending them now, not without knowing who had access to department servers. Instead, he tucked the device back into his coat and patted Rex lightly on the flank. "Good work, boy," he whispered. "We're not done yet." Thunder rumbled overhead, and another surge of rain lashed against the stained glass windows. A flash of lightning illuminated the hall for a brief second, casting grotesque, shifting shadows across the walls. The mourners near the door seemed to flinch as if they too felt the tightening coil of tension wrapping around the room. Malcolm stepped away from the casket, moving back into the shadows at the perimeter. Blending into the architecture like a ghost, he watched, listened, waited. His fingers played idly with Rex's collar, an old habit when nerves got the better of him. Somewhere, someone in this room knew the truth. Someone had orchestrated this entire funeral not as a memorial, but as a cover-up. A final erasure of a man who had seen or done something he should not have. Malcolm's mind churned through possibilities. Names, alliances. The biker gangs, the crooked cops, the federal agents with their hidden agenda. The list of enemies Marcus Turner could have had was long, and growing longer by the minute. But first things first. Malcolm needed proof solid, irrefutable. He needed leverage if he was going to survive what he had just stumbled into. Because now, he wasn't just a mourner at a funeral. He was a witness to a conspiracy. And from the way the bikers by the door were whispering and glancing his way, it was clear he wasn't the only one who knew the game had just changed. Malcolm tightened his hold on Rex's leash, his pulse a steady drumbeat in his ears. He would have to move carefully, tread the razor's edge between exposing the truth and staying alive long enough to tell it. As he shifted his weight, preparing to slip deeper into the chapel's labyrinth of halls and corridors, a sudden sharp movement near the side entrance caught his eye. He froze, every muscle coiled, from deep in his chest as the shadows by the door twisted and something, or someone, stepped into the dim light. Malcolm's body tensed as the figure by the side entrance shifted, slipping back into the crowd with a practiced ease that immediately set every alarm bell in his mind ringing. Rex's growl deepened into a snarl, vibrating up the leash and into Malcolm's arm like an electric current. The dog's amber eyes locked onto the retreating figure, his muscles bunching, ready to launch. Malcolm gave a barely perceptible nod. "Go," he whispered under his breath, and like a released arrow, Rex shot forward, weaving expertly through the rows of empty chairs and mourners. The man they were chasing was tall, clad in a worn leather jacket with faded patches, a helmet tucked under one arm. He didn't run outright, that would have drawn too much attention, but his pace quickened, his movements deliberate, slicing through the dispersing crowd like a shark among minnows. Malcolm followed, moving swiftly, his wet boots thudding quietly against the chapel's slick floor, one hand brushing back the edge of his coat to clear access to the firearm holstered at his hip. Rex closed the distance rapidly, barking once, loud and sharp, a sound that turned every head in the room. The biker glanced back, his face briefly illuminated under a flickering light angular features. A week's worth of unshaven stubble, a narrow scar running from his jaw to just beneath his left ear. Recognition flashed in Malcolm's mind, not from personal memory but from old mugshots buried deep in case files. This wasn't just some random biker. This was Saul Needles Vance, a known enforcer for the Hellfire Sons, specializing in tying up loose ends. The moment their eyes met, Saul bolted. Gone was the casual indifference. He shoved past an elderly mourner, sending her sprawling into the pews, and crashed through the side exit into the rain-soaked courtyard beyond. Malcolm cursed under his breath, sprinting after him, Rex bounding just ahead. The storm outside had intensified. Sheets of water blurred Malcolm's vision as he burst through the door into the alleyway beyond the chapel. Neon lights from a nearby dive bar flickered weakly through the downpour, casting long, warped shadows across the cracked pavement. Malcolm barely caught a glimpse of Saul's retreating form before he vanished around a corner. Rex darted forward, his nose to the ground, leading Malcolm down the narrow alley choked with dumpsters and broken glass. The world became a cacophony of rushing water, distant thunder, and the pounding of Malcolm's own heart. Halfway down the alley, Rex skidded to a halt, hackles raised, and began barking furiously at a pile of discarded tarps and crates. Malcolm approached cautiously, weapon drawn. Rex lunged forward, pawing at something beneath the tarp, and with a practiced sweep, Malcolm yanked it away. Nothing but a crumpled, blood-stained handkerchief and the lingering, unmistakable scent of gunpowder. Malcolm knelt, scooping the cloth into an evidence bag. His hands moved quickly, efficiently, but inside a cold fury was building. Saul had left it deliberately, a mocking breadcrumb, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Either way, the message was clear. He knew he was being hunted, and he wasn't afraid. Malcolm glanced down at Rex, who whined low in his throat, the dog's nose twitching as he sniffed the air. There was more here, something just out of reach, something hiding in the chaos of the storm. Pocketing the evidence, Malcolm rose and scanned the mouth of the alley. No sign of Saul, just the endless sheets of rain and the flickering neon reflected in dirty puddles. He tapped Rex lightly on the side, signaling a new search pattern. The dog immediately moved out, nose low, his body taut with purpose. Malcolm's mind raced alongside him, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. Saul Vance was a cleaner. His presence here wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't come to mourn Marcus Turner. He had come to erase him, his memory, his connections, maybe even his body itself. Every time Malcolm thought he was getting closer to the truth, something was left behind, a smell, a fragment, a trace, as if the truth itself was mocking him, staying just one step out of reach. It was a game, and Saul was playing it well, loop after loop, sign after sign, Rex's instincts guiding Malcolm through the labyrinthine deception. Lightning flashed again, illuminating a figure at the far end of the alley. A brief, taunting silhouette before it disappeared into the deluge. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He sprinted after it, Rex at his side, their steps splashing loudly through the growing puddles. The alley twisted and turned, narrowing until it was barely more than a slit between two condemned buildings. The scent of mildew and rot filled the air, but under it, faint and persistent, lingered the acrid tang of cordite and blood. They emerged into an abandoned lot behind the chapel, chain-link fences rusting and sagging, weeds clawing their way up through cracked asphalt. In the center stood a cluster of dilapidated storage sheds, their doors hanging ajar, creaking in the storm's wind. Rex hesitated, nose working furiously. Malcolm scanned the area, gun raised, heart hammering against his ribs. A low, sharp whistle pierced the rain, high and fast a signal. Rex snapped his head toward the farthest shed and barked once, urgent and sharp. Malcolm turned just in time to see a shadow dart inside. No more waiting, no more half measures. Malcolm moved, boots pounding against the wet ground, closing the distance with brutal speed. He kicked the door open, Rex lunging ahead into the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old oil, rust, and fear. A single naked bulb swung from the ceiling, casting frantic, dancing shadows. Malcolm swept the room with his weapon, heart in his throat. Empty, just rusted tools, broken shelving, and a scattering of rat droppings. No Saul, but something else. Pinned to the far wall with a single hunting knife was a strip of leather part of a biker vest, and scrawled across it in bold, bloody letters were two words that made Malcolm's blood run cold. "You're next." Rex whined, ears flattening against his skull. Malcolm backed toward the door, mind racing, heart thudding with a sickening rhythm. Saul had planned this, the funeral, the chase, the message. It was all orchestrated, a deadly game designed to draw Malcolm out, to isolate him. He wasn't hunting Saul anymore, Saul was hunting him. And somewhere, hidden in the storm, watching with predator's eyes, Saul was waiting for his moment to strike. Malcolm wiped the rain from his eyes, feeling the weight of the night press down around him. Rex pressed against his leg, a silent reassurance that he wasn't alone. But Malcolm knew, deep in his gut, that this was only the beginning. The real hunt had just begun. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the lot, something moved, and Rex's head snapped up sharply, his body going rigid as a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Malcolm's instincts screamed at him to keep moving, to not stay in the open where Saul's eyes might already have him lined up in crosshairs. But his mind was a whirring machine, processing, connecting, hunting for the missing pieces that had led them to this deadly night. He tugged Rex close, retreating into the relative shelter of a half-capacity shed, pulling out his burner phone, a precaution he kept for when department channels couldn't be trusted, which lately felt like always. His fingers moved quickly, sending an encrypted message to an old informant who owed him more than a few favors, asking for everything on Marcus Blaze Turner that wasn't already public record. As the rain hammered the rusted metal roof above him, Malcolm scoured his own fragmented memories of the biker whose funeral had become a blood-soaked stage. Marcus Turner wasn't just another biker thug. Malcolm remembered his name surfacing years ago in an investigation so politically sensitive that it had been buried before it even saw daylight. Operation Iron Gull, a federal probe into illegal arms trafficking moving through biker gangs across 3 states, involving weapons stolen from military shipments, some even rumored to be advanced prototypes not meant for civilian eyes. Turner had been listed then not as a suspect but as a potential witness, someone who had gotten cold feet after realizing he was a pawn in something far larger than backyard deals and gang turf wars. Malcolm remembered because he had been there, at the edge of it, assigned by Internal Affairs to review the initial files, before the entire case was unceremoniously dropped under direct orders from the Commissioner's office, citing sufficient evidence and resource reallocation. No further investigation, no paper trail, no questions. He had wanted to dig deeper, even pushed back once, only to find a memo in his inbox the next morning, warning him to stay within his lane unless he wanted his badge and pension to vanish. That had been the first time Malcolm realized how wide and rotted the cracks in the system truly ran. And now, here he was, years later, staring into the maelstrom those secrets had birthed. His burner buzzed in his palm, a curt message flashing on the cracked screen. Turner equals Fed informant, flipped 6 months ago, supposed to testify, disappeared before deposition. Feds blamed local PD leak, suspected dead months ago. Nobody. Until now, Malcolm felt a hollow chill crawl down his spine. Turner hadn't just been a witness, he had been a linchpin. His testimony could have shattered entire networks, implicated not just criminals but law enforcement officers, military personnel, maybe even elected officials. No wonder someone had gone to such lengths to erase him. And no wonder they had staged the funeral with such precision to bury more than a body, to bury the truth itself. Rex shifted beside him, ears flicking, sensing Malcolm's rising tension. Malcolm raked a hand through his rain-soaked hair, thinking furiously. Saul wasn't acting alone. Someone powerful enough to orchestrate this level of cover-up. Someone who had the resources to make an entire operation disappear without leaving a ripple, had to be pulling the strings. He remembered the face of Deputy Chief Sanderson. Smooth, affable, always playing both sides of the political aisle. Sanderson had been the one to personally deliver the warning about digging too deep into Iron Gull. Malcolm's gut twisted. It fit too perfectly. But he couldn't move against Sanderson or anyone else without more than suspicion. He needed proof, hard and fast, before the trap Saul had laid snapped shut around him completely. He pulled out his notebook, flipping to a page he had scrawled hastily that morning. Names, affiliations, ties to Turner. There was one name circled twice. Jonah Wexler, a low-level smuggler who had suddenly gone radio silent 3 days before Turner's scheduled deposition. If Turner had reached out to anyone before his death, it would have been Wexler. A distant clap of thunder shook the night, and Malcolm pocketed his burner, wiping rain from his face. Rex stayed glued to his side as they moved back toward the edge of the lot, slipping through the chain-link fence into a side alley. His mind worked at a frantic pace, reviewing everything he knew about Turner, about Iron Gull, about how many people would have killed to keep those secrets buried. Turner had known too much, and Malcolm realized with grim clarity that by chasing these threads he now knew too much as well. He needed access to the old case files, the real ones, the ones never uploaded into the official database. That meant getting back into the precinct, a dangerous move. Too many eyes, too many compromised players. But there was no choice. If he didn't get ahead of this, Rex gave a sharp bark, startling Malcolm out of his thoughts. The dog's body was rigid, nose pointed down the alley where faint footprints were being washed away by the rain. Heavy boots, hurried steps, weaving toward a row of shuttered shops. Malcolm hesitated, weighing his options. Pursue the lead immediately, or regroup, gather intel, and strike strategically. Another crack of lightning illuminated something at the far end of the alley. A figure watching him, unmoving, a cigarette glowing briefly in the darkness before being crushed underfoot. Saul again, or someone else? Malcolm couldn't tell. All he knew was that the game was still in motion, and he was running out of time. He tugged Rex closer and pressed deeper into the shadows, planning his next move, every sense straining against the oppressive night, aware that the noose was tightening with every step he took toward the truth hidden behind Marcus Turner's lifeless eyes and the blood-stained lies of those who had ordered his execution. Malcolm moved through the wet, narrow streets like a shadow, Rex at his side, both of them soaked to the bone yet undeterred, the cold no longer biting but sharpening their senses. He clutched the slip of information he had pieced together in his mind like a weapon, knowing that Turner's secrets weren't buried yet, not completely, and if he could pull on the right thread, the entire rotten tapestry might just unravel. Rex's nose worked furiously against the concrete, following a trail Malcolm couldn't see but trusted more than any informant or paper trail. The storm had washed much of the evidence away, but not enough to fool a dog like Rex. They wound through alleys and side streets, past boarded-up storefronts and abandoned cars, until the neon sign of the Red Widow flickered into view, its crimson glow barely piercing the rain. The Red Widow was a biker bar in the roughest part of the city, a place where colors were worn proudly, and lawmen were about as welcome as rattlesnakes at a picnic. Malcolm's gut tightened. Going in there was asking for trouble, but he was far past caring. He wiped the rain from his brow, adjusted the collar of his jacket to conceal his badge, and pushed through the battered door, Rex close behind him. The bar was a den of stale beer, sweat, and tension. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. Leather creaked. Malcolm let the door swing shut behind him with a hollow thud, the sudden silence oppressive. Eyes hard and suspicious bore into him from every corner of the smoke-hazed room. A few bikers shifted in their seats, hands straying toward concealed weapons. Malcolm kept his hands visible, non-thundering, letting them see he wasn't here to start something he couldn't finish, but also that he wasn't about to back down. Rex growled low in his throat, the sound barely audible but potent enough to make a few patrons sit back warily. Malcolm moved slowly toward the bar, noting exits, counting bodies, mapping threats. Behind the scarred oak counter, a grizzled bartender with a face like cracked leather narrowed his eyes. "You're a long way from downtown, officer," he rasped. Malcolm gave a tight smile. "Not here for trouble," he said, voice khaki, "just looking for some old friends." A few snorts and muttered curses answered him. Malcolm didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo of the blood-stained strip of leather from the shed, still fresh in his mind, and laid it gently on the counter. "Marcus Turner," he said. "Blaze, I know he used to come here. Maybe someone remembers him." The bartender glanced down, his face unreadable, then spat into a rag and began wiping an already clean glass. "A lot of ghosts pass through here," he said non-committally. Malcolm leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Someone went through a lot of trouble to make him disappear. Someone who doesn't mind tying off loose ends. He let the words hang, heavy with implication. Across the room, a chair scraped back sharply. Malcolm turned just in time to see a figure slip through a side door leading into the back. Without hesitation, he tapped Rex's flank, signaling pursuit. They moved swiftly, cutting through the dense, hostile air of the bar. The back room was dimly lit, cluttered with broken furniture and old arcade machines gathering dust. Malcolm scanned the area, heart pounding, then spotted it. A corkboard tucked behind a stack of crates, covered in curling photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings. He moved to it, Rex guarding the doorway, and anyway he scanned the board quickly, and there, half hidden behind a curling flyer for a long-defunct rally, he found what he was looking for. A photograph, grainy and faded but unmistakable. Marcus Turner, smiling broadly, one arm slung around another man, tall, broad-shouldered, clean-cut in a way that didn't fit the chaos around him. Malcolm's stomach dropped. It was Aaron Briggs, the head of security detail for the funeral, the man Malcolm had shaken hands with less than 12 hours ago. In the photo, Briggs wasn't wearing a uniform. No badge, no medals. He wore the colors of the Hellfire Sons, a full-patch member. Malcolm cursed under his breath. The betrayal hit him harder than any blow. Briggs wasn't just a compromised cop. He was deep in it, part of the very machinery Turner had been preparing to expose. It made a twisted kind of sense. Who better to coordinate security, to control access, to ensure that Turner's final disappearance happened without interference? Malcolm snapped a photo of the evidence, stuffing the physical copy into his jacket for good measure. Rex gave a soft whine, drawing Malcolm's attention. Heavy footsteps pounded in the corridor outside. The bikers weren't going to let a cop snoop around their shrine to the dead without consequences. Malcolm slipped the photo into his inner pocket and backed toward the window, Rex at his side. No way they could fight their way out the front. They needed another exit. The window was cracked, the glass weakened by years of neglect. Malcolm smashed it with the butt of his pistol, the sound drowned by another crack of thunder. He shoved Rex through first, then hauled himself after, cutting his hand on the jagged frame. Shouts erupted behind him as the bikers discovered his escape. No time. He hit the ground running, Rex bolting ahead, leading them into the maze of alleys behind the Red Widow. Rain slicked the pavement, making every step a potential disaster, but adrenaline pushed them forward, faster, harder. Gunshots rang out behind them, sharp cracks that echoed off the brick walls. But Malcolm didn't look back. He trusted Rex to find the path. He trusted his own instincts to survive. They ducked into a narrow passage between two warehouses, Malcolm pressing his back against the damp bricks, Rex crouching low beside him. His pulse thundered in his ears, but his mind was clear. Briggs was the link. Briggs had the answers. And Malcolm had the one thing now that Briggs couldn't afford: evidence. But if Briggs realized what Malcolm had found, he wouldn't wait for protocol or badges. He would come hard, fast, and final. The rain masked their scent, but it couldn't mask the inevitability of the confrontation to come. Malcolm checked his weapon, feeling the reassuring weight of it in his hand. Somewhere out there, beyond the storm and the shadows, Briggs was preparing for war. Malcolm wiped the rain from his face, squared his shoulders, and prepared to strike first, unaware that in the darkness just a few blocks away, another set of eyes watched his every move. Another player entering the deadly game with their own agenda. The storm had only grown more violent by the time Malcolm and Rex doubled back toward the chapel, their clothes drenched, their muscles aching from the relentless sprint through the alleys. Malcolm's mind raced even faster than his feet, weaving the threads together. Turner's murder, Briggs' betrayal, Saul's bloody trail of threats. He knew the next step had to be careful, surgical. He needed to confront Briggs, but not head-on. Not yet. He needed to catch him, exposed, vulnerable. He pushed open the side door of the chapel, the hinges groaning under the weight of the rain, and stepped back into the heavy, suffocating air inside. It was different now, tighter, angrier. More officers lingered near the entrance, their eyes narrowing when they caught sight of Malcolm. Deputy Chief Sanderson stood near the altar, his posture rigid, his arms crossed. At his side, Briggs loomed like a statue, his expression neutral but his eyes too sharp, too watchful. Malcolm barely had time to scan the room before the first accusation hit him like a sucker punch. "Detective Rhodes," Sanderson barked, his voice echoing through the half-empty chapel. "You're wanted for questioning. Unauthorized tampering with a crime scene." Murmurs rippled through the officers and bystanders still lingering. Faces turning, whispers growing into a toxic hum. Malcolm squared his shoulders, every instinct screaming that this wasn't justice, it was containment. "I was following a lead," he said evenly, keeping his voice calm despite the heat rising in his chest. "Turner's death wasn't what it was reported to be. There's a second wound." Sanderson cut him off with a slicing motion of his hand. "You're contaminating evidence and disrespecting the dead," he said, louder now, projecting to the crowd, spinning the narrative like a true politician. "Stand down, detective, or you'll be suspended pending internal review." Malcolm opened his mouth to argue, to throw the photograph of Briggs and Turner onto the floor for everyone to see. But Rex moved first. The dog tensed beside him, ears flattened, growled deep and dangerous. Malcolm followed Rex's gaze and saw Briggs edging slowly toward the coffin, hand slipping inside his jacket, reaching for something Malcolm couldn't see, but didn't need to guess. Without warning, Rex lunged, teeth bared, muscles rippling under wet fur. The crowd gasped, some stumbling back as the German Shepherd launched himself at Briggs, knocking the man sideways before he could complete whatever move he had started. Briggs crashed into a row of chairs, cursing as Rex pinned him with a snarl, jaws inches from his throat. The chapel exploded into chaos. Several officers drew their weapons, shouts filled the air. Malcolm stepped between them and Rex, hands raised. "Back off," he shouted. "He's the one you want, search for him, now." But even as he spoke, he saw the truth settle over the room like a heavy fog. They wouldn't listen. Not to him, not to a black man pointing fingers at one of their own. Briggs's skin was the right color, his badge polished and his smile perfect. Malcolm's was not. He could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the suspicion, the anger. Sanderson's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but wasn't far from it. "Control your animal, detective," he said coldly. "You're making things worse for yourself." Rex snarled again, teeth snapping inches from Bridges' neck, the dog's instincts screaming the truth that Malcolm knew would never be heard here, not while the walls of this system stood tall and unbroken. Malcolm gritted his teeth, forcing his voice steady. "Search him," he said again, softer but more deadly. "You'll find what you're looking for." Sanderson hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Briggs shoved Rex off with a vicious kick and scrambled to his feet, pulling something from inside his jacket. A sleek black pistol modified, no serial numbers. The crowd recoiled, gasping. Officers leveled their weapons, shouting commands that overlapped into meaningless noise. But Briggs wasn't aiming at anyone in particular. He was aiming to cause chaos, confusion, the perfect cover to escape. Malcolm dove sideways as Briggs fired into the ceiling, glass and plaster raining down. Rex lunged again, but Briggs was already moving, shoving through the panicked crowd, knocking over pews, sprinting toward the side door. Malcolm scrambled after him, bricks surging ahead, but bodies tangled in their path, uniforms, mourners, the stunned and the terrified. The door slammed shut behind Briggs, the heavy bar locking automatically. Malcolm cursed, slamming his fist against the wood. They had lost him. For now. He turned back toward the chapel, where Sanderson was barking orders. Officers were herding civilians, and Rex stood, shaking dust from his coat, eyes burning with frustration that mirrored Malcolm's own. He knew what they would say, that Malcolm had lost control, that he had let emotion cloud his judgment, that Rex had attacked without cause. And he knew it wouldn't matter that Briggs had drawn first, that the proof of betrayal had been there, clear as daylight. The system would protect itself, and it would bury him if it had to. Could already feel the walls closing in, the trap tightening, the same way it always did when someone who wasn't supposed to ask questions dared to lift the rug and look at what squirmed underneath. He was no longer just investigating a murder. He was challenging the very machinery designed to crush men like him into dust. He reached down and scratched Rex behind the ears, the dog leaning into the touch. A solid, living reassurance that at least he wasn't facing this alone. Not yet. Not while there was still breath in his body and fire in his blood. Malcolm straightened, his mind already racing, recalibrating. He had Briggs's connection to Turner. He had the hidden wound. He had the blood-stained handkerchief Saul had left behind. It wasn't enough for the courtroom, but it was enough for war. A war he hadn't chosen, but one he damn well intended to survive. He turned his gaze toward Sanderson, locking eyes with the man who had started this public crucifixion, and smiled grimly, the kind of smile that promised no surrender. Somewhere deep inside, Malcolm knew the next move wouldn't be made in the courtroom or the precinct. It would be made in the shadows, in the gutters where the real deals were cut and the real power shifted hands. Rex barked once, sharp and eager, as if sensing the shift in Malcolm's resolve. Without a word, Malcolm turned away from the ruined chapel, his mind already drawing battle lines, his footsteps leading him toward the storm that waited beyond the stained glass light. The rain was a relentless curtain as Malcolm and Rex moved away from the ruined chapel, the storm swallowing the furious shouting and confusion behind them. Every nerve in Malcolm's body was a live wire, every instinct screaming that the attack on him inside the chapel had been too crude, too obvious. Not the careful hands of men trying to protect secrets, but the desperate flailing of those setting the stage for something far larger. As Rex tugged at the leash, nose low to the ground, Malcolm's mind replayed everything. Brick's movements, the impossible ease of the escape, Sanderson's forced theatrics. None of it fit unless the funeral had never really been about Marcus Turner. Malcolm stopped cold under the flickering light of a broken street lamp, realization crashing into him with brutal force. Turner's death was old business, already tied up with a bloody bow. No. Today was about living. Someone else had been marked at that funeral, someone important enough to orchestrate chaos, to weaponize grief and distraction. He scanned the wet streets, his mind racing, searching faces in the shifting crowds still spilling out of the chapel into the storm. Then he saw her, small, unassuming, trying to blend into the mourners but standing out to Malcolm's sharpened eyes like a flare in the darkness. Lisa Rowe, former accountant for the biker chapter, had vanished off the grid 6 months ago after the feds tried and failed to flip her as a witness. Rumors said she held the financial keys to dozens of illicit operations, knew where the bodies were buried, where the money flowed, who paid whom and how deep the rot went. And she had been at Marcus Turner's funeral, hiding in plain sight, probably believing the chaos was coincidence. Malcolm's breath caught. She didn't know she was walking straight into her own execution. He tugged Rex close and pushed through the sodden crowd, heart hammering against his ribs. He had to reach her before they did. He shoved past mourners, ducked under outstretched umbrellas, ignoring the curses and startled yells as he sprinted across the courtyard. "Lisa," he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind and thunder. She turned slightly, confusion etching her features, just enough for Malcolm to see the fear dawning in her wide eyes. She had realized too late. A sharp metallic click reached Malcolm's ears, distinct even through the storm, the unmistakable sound of a detonator triggering. His muscles seized in instinctive horror. "Get down," he roared, lunging forward as the world ripped apart around him. The explosion lifted him off his feet, a wall of force and sound smashing into his body like a freight train. He hit the ground hard, skidding across the wet pavement, the breath knocked from his lungs. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine, the world reduced to flashes of light and broken noise. Rex's bark pierced the haze, desperate, furious. Malcolm forced himself up, vision swimming, his hands scraped raw against the asphalt. Through the smoke and falling debris he saw chaos, mourners screaming, scattering, some lying motionless, others staggering blindly, their clothes torn and bloodied. Gunfire erupted, sharp and vicious, muzzle flashes lighting up the courtyard like a hellish strobe. Malcolm ducked instinctively, dragging Rex with him behind the shattered remains of a stone bench. He scanned the field, adrenaline pumping cold fire through his veins. Black-clad figures moved through the smoke with ruthless efficiency, rifles up, faces obscured by masks and helmets. This wasn't a random biker retaliation. This was a hit squad, military precision in every movement, and their targets were clear. Witnesses. Malcolm's gaze snapped back to Lisa. She was crawling across the ground toward a crumpled trash can, trying to shield herself, terror written across every line of her body. He moved, muscles screaming in protest, staying low, using the wreckage for cover. Bullets ripped through the air above him, splintering wood and stone. Rex stayed at his side, moving in perfect synchronicity, every instinct trained for survival and protection. Malcolm fired 2 quick shots at the advancing figures, forcing them to dive for cover. He didn't wait to see if he hit anything. His only objective now was Lisa. He broke cover, sprinting across the open courtyard, each step a gamble against death. He reached her just as a bullet tore through the trash can she had been hiding behind. Without thinking, he grabbed her arm and hauled her up, half carrying, half dragging her toward the relative shelter of a service entrance at the side of the chapel. Behind them, the firefight intensified, the sharp staccato of automatic weapons drowning out the screams. The air was thick with cordite and fear, the ground slick with rain and blood. Malcolm kicked open the door, shoving Lisa and Rex inside ahead of him, slamming it shut just as another round of gunfire shredded the frame. He braced against the door, breathing hard, mind racing. Lisa was sobbing, clutching at her side where shrapnel had torn through her jacket. Blood stained her hands, but she was alive. "You're not safe here," Malcolm growled, forcing her to look at him. "They're not going to stop." She nodded, wide-eyed, mute with terror. Malcolm turned to Rex, who was already at the far side of the hallway, ears pricked, body rigid, nose twitching. "Find us a way out," Malcolm whispered. They couldn't stay pinned in here. Reinforcements would come, but whether they'd be on Malcolm's side or the hit squad's payroll was a coin toss he wasn't willing to bet on. Rex led the way down the narrow service corridors, Malcolm and Lisa following closely. The walls shook with distant explosions as grenades went off somewhere outside, designed not to kill but to scatter and confuse. Malcolm's mind flashed to Briggs, to Sanderson, to Saul and the invisible puppet masters pulling their strings. This wasn't about cleaning up loose ends anymore. This was scorched earth. They rounded a corner and stumbled into a supply room stacked high with folding chairs and cleaning equipment. Malcolm slammed the door behind them and dropped to one knee, checking Lisa's wound. Superficial, bleeding heavily but survivable if they moved fast. He tore a strip from his undershirt and wrapped it around her waist, tying it to stem the bleeding. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and urgent. Rex barked sharply once, the sound muffled but urgent. Malcolm looked up, heart sinking. Through a narrow utility window near the ceiling, he could see the flash of headlights, the crunch of tires over broken pavement. More vehicles arriving, more men. No escape back through the chapel, no safe exit through the front. They were trapped. Unless... Malcolm's gaze swept the room, landing on a rusted maintenance hatch halfway up the back wall, barely large enough for a grown man to squeeze through. It led to the old underground tunnels beneath the city, forgotten by most but still accessible if you knew where to look. A slim chance, but better than none. He grabbed a battered chair, dragging it over, and motioned Lisa to climb. "You first," he ordered, boosting her up despite her protest. Behind him, the distant gunfire faded into an eerie, expectant silence, the kind that only ever came before the next wave of violence. Malcolm tightened his grip on Rex's collar, feeling the dog's steady heartbeat beneath his fingers. They had survived the first blow, but the war was only beginning, and somewhere beyond the smoke and blood, the men hunting them were regrouping, preparing for the tunnel was a tomb of stale air and darkness as Malcolm pushed Lisa through the maintenance hatch, dragging himself and Rex in after her, sealing the door behind them with a grunt of effort. The distant echoes of gunfire faded into a muffled drumbeat above their heads, but Malcolm knew better than to believe they were safe. He could feel it in the way Rex moved, tense and alert, every step cautious, every sniff of the damp concrete floor careful and measured. They moved quickly, guided only by the weak beam of Malcolm's flashlight, its flickering light carving narrow corridors out of the pitch-black void. Lisa stumbled often, half from exhaustion and half from blood loss, but Malcolm kept her moving, one hand on her shoulder, the other clutching his side where shrapnel had grazed him. Every few minutes they would stop, listening, hearts hammering against their ribs, for the telltale sounds of pursuit. Somewhere above them, the city roared in chaos, sirens wailing, the storm lashing the buildings like a living thing. But down here, it was as if the world had been swallowed whole. They turned a corner and came to a junction where the tunnel split 3 ways. Malcolm hesitated, scanning for signs, for any clue, but the years had eroded all markings into indecipherable scars on the walls. Rex moved ahead, nose low, tail stiff, and without hesitation chose the middle path. Malcolm trusted him, because he had to, because trust in Rex had kept him alive more times than he could count. They hurried forward, the tunnel narrowing until Malcolm had to crouch slightly, his flashlight cutting crazy patterns across the walls. Then the shot came. It was a whisper through the darkness, a soft crack that barely registered before the world exploded into pain and movement. A bullet ricocheted off the wall inches from Malcolm's head, showering him with concrete dust. He grabbed Lisa, throwing her to the ground and covering her with his body just as a second shot rang out. Closer this time, more precise. Rex snarled, a savage sound that echoed off the walls, and launched himself toward the source of the attack. Time slowed. Malcolm saw the muzzle flash first, a tiny burst of fire in the dark. Then he saw Rex, his body a blur of muscle and fury, leaping between Malcolm and the unseen shooter. The gun fired again. Rex jerked in midair, a strangled yelp tearing from his throat, and he crashed to the ground with a heavy, wet thud. Malcolm roared, adrenaline surging as he rolled Lisa behind a pile of rubble and turned toward where Rex had fallen. Another shot screamed through the tunnel, missing him by inches. He fired back blindly, forcing the shooter to retreat deeper into the shadows. Silence fell, thick and oppressive. Malcolm crawled to Rex, heart hammering against his ribs, throat tight with panic. The dog lay on his side, chest rising and falling in shallow, shuddering gasps, blood pooling around him, staining the concrete a deep, slick red. "Stay with me, buddy," Malcolm whispered hoarsely, pressing his hands against the wound in Rex's side, feeling the warmth of life slipping through his fingers. Rex's eyes, those fierce, intelligent eyes, locked onto Malcolm's with a painful clarity. His tail thumped weakly against the ground once. Then, with a strength Malcolm would have sworn impossible, Rex dragged his paw through the blood pooling beneath him and began to scratch at the floor. Malcolm watched, stunned, as Rex carved a rough shape into the concrete, his movements slow, deliberate, purposeful. It was a symbol one Malcolm recognized instantly, a sigil burned into his memory from 1,000 departmental briefings and internal files. The emblem of the Internal Operations Division, a shadowy branch of the department responsible for covert surveillance, infiltration, and, when necessary, elimination. A division so secretive that most officers doubted it even truly existed. And now, staring at that blood-drawn symbol on the floor, Malcolm understood the full scope of the betrayal. The conspiracy hadn't come from outside. It wasn't bikers or cartel thugs or rogue criminals. It was his own brothers in blue, the so-called guardians of the law, had orchestrated Marcus Turner's death, had turned a funeral into a bloodbath, had sent assassins to wipe clean the slate of anyone who dared know too much. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about survival, about silencing threats before they could speak. And Rex, in his final moments, had pointed a bloodied paw straight at the heart of the rock. Malcolm knelt there, the flashlight trembling in his hand, the cold seeping into his bones, and felt something deep and primal break inside him. He leaned down, pressing his forehead gently against Rex's, whispering promises he could never keep, apologies he could never make right. Rex's breathing slowed, shuddered once more, and then stopped altogether, leaving only the soft hiss of Malcolm's own breath and the roar of the storm overhead. For a long moment, Malcolm stayed frozen, the weight of grief and fury pinning him to the floor. Then he rose slowly, pocketing the blood-stained flashlight, his movements mechanical, methodical. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was the last thread they hadn't cut, and he knew without a shred of doubt that they would come for him next. He glanced at Lisa, still huddled against the wall, her eyes wide with horror and understanding. She knew too now. They were both dead if they stayed here. Malcolm holstered his weapon, scooped Rex's limp body into his arms despite the protest from his battered ribs, and nodded grimly to Lisa. Without a word, they moved deeper into the tunnels, away from the broken bodies and broken promises, toward whatever fragile chance at survival waited beyond the next bend. Somewhere ahead, the darkness shifted, and a faint scent of fresh rain told Malcolm they were close to another exit, to another battleground. He tightened his grip on Rex, feeling the sticky warmth seep into his clothes, and promised silently to the dog, to himself, to every silent casualty of this war, he would not stop, not until the whole rotten house of cards came crashing down. Ahead of them, a shaft of faint pale light beckoned like a ghost, and Malcolm moved toward it without hesitation, every step fueled by rage, by loss, by the unshakable certainty that the real battle was just beginning. Malcolm emerged from the mouth of the tunnel into the frigid embrace of the storm. Rex's lifeless body cradled tightly against his chest, Lisa staggering behind him, her face pale and blood-spattered. The city stretched before them, distorted by sheets of rain and the warble of distant sirens, a broken, heaving thing that seemed to bleed along with them. But Malcolm's vision had narrowed to a single burning point of clarity, a singular truth forged in blood and betrayal. The puppeteer was still out there, hidden beneath the mask of a hero, and Malcolm would not rest until he tore that mask away. He handed Rex's body gently to Lisa, meeting her stricken gaze with a hard nod, then turned, loading his weapon with slow, deliberate precision. The path ahead was suicide, but it no longer mattered. Some debts demanded payment in full, and Malcolm had no intention of leaving the books unbalanced. Through the fragmented intel he had pieced together, whispers from old cases and coded entries buried deep within inaccessible files, Malcolm knew where he needed to go. The old Bastion, an abandoned police training facility on the outskirts of town, long shuttered due to budget cuts, but in reality converted into a clandestine operations hub. It was there that internal operations had set its roots, safe from oversight, from scrutiny, from the fragile grasp of the public trust. Malcolm stole a battered police cruiser from a side street, hot-wiring it with steady hands while Lisa kept watch, and they sped through the battered veins of the city toward the final reckoning. The Bastion loomed through the rain, a fortress of crumbling stone and rusted iron, a monument to a time when appearances still mattered. Now, it stood hollow, a fitting tomb for the rot that had festered unchecked within the Bastion. Malcolm parked the cruiser 2 blocks away, moving on foot with Lisa close behind, weaving through shattered fencing and collapsing walls. Every step closer tightened the coil inside him, the rage tempered now into something sharper, colder, more lethal. They breached the perimeter through a collapsed section of the north wall, slipping into the cavernous main hall, where echoes of old drills and shouted commands still seemed to linger in the stale air. Lights flickered deep within the complex, power lines crudely rerouted to maintain whatever clandestine operations still festered here. Malcolm motioned for Lisa to stay low, guiding her into the shadows while he advanced alone, weapon raised, senses burning. The deeper he moved, the clearer the picture became. Stacks of unregistered weapons, crates marked for civilian protection programs, filled with military-grade hardware, dossiers with sanitized profiles and real names blacked out, contracts signed not with ink but blood. It was all here, laid bare without apology. The entire facade of public safety weaponized into a revenue stream of death and control. The program had started years ago under the guise of combating organized crime, a secret arm of the law given absolute freedom to operate outside the shackles of ethics and accountability. Somewhere along the way, the mission had twisted, the line between protector and predator dissolving, until the only loyalty left was to profit and power. Marcus Turner had stumbled onto the truth. Lisa Rowe had kept the ledgers, and Malcolm Rhodes, against every order, every threat, had clawed his way to the black, beating heart of it. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, and Malcolm pivoted, guns snapping up, muscles screaming for action. From the far end of the hall emerged a man Malcolm knew too well, a man whose speeches had once stirred crowds, whose medals had gleamed under the lights of City Hall. Captain Richard K9’s, the golden boy of the Riverside Police Department, a symbol of sacrifice and service, now standing in the ruins of his own corruption with the easy arrogance of a king atop a throne of bone. K9’s wore civilian clothes now, dark and unremarkable, but Malcolm saw the glint of a sidearm beneath his jacket, the practiced stance of a man who had killed before and would do so again without hesitation. "Well," K9’s said, his voice carrying easily over the howl of the storm seeping through the shattered windows. "I was wondering when one of you idiots would crawl out of the wreckage." Malcolm said nothing, his weapon steady, his breathing slow. K9’s smiled, that same charming politician's smile that had fooled 1,000 citizens and earned 100 promotions. "You could have been part of this, Rhodes," K9’s said, stepping closer, hands spread in mock innocence. "You had the instincts, the drive. We could have used you." Malcolm's voice was a low growl, barely more than a whisper. "You used everything. Honor, Duty, trust. You burned it all down for a paycheck. Kearns chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. Honor doesn't keep the lights on. Duty doesn't pay for body armor. You think the city wanted to know how close they were to collapse? They wanted the monsters kept in the dark where they could pretend the world was still neat and clean. We just gave them what they asked for. Malcolm's finger tightened slightly on the trigger, but he forced himself to wait, to listen. And Turner, he demanded, Lisa, Rex? Kearns shrugged. A small, indifferent gesture. Collateral damage. Turner got nervous. Lisa kept records she shouldn't have. As for your dog? Kearns shook his head, almost pitying. That's on you. You should have taught him better. Rage flared hot and blinding in Malcolm's chest, but he kept it leashed, focused. Kearns was trying to provoke him, to make him reckless. Malcolm's mind raced, weighing options, calculating distances. Cover, lines of fire. Around them, the ruined hull groaned under the weight of years and betrayal. Somewhere behind Kearns, Malcolm spotted movement-armed men, slipping into position, rifles ready. It had been a trap from the start. They hadn't expected Malcolm to find the bastion. But now that he had, they couldn't let him leave alive. Kearns' smile widened slightly as he saw realization dawn in Malcolm's eyes. This could have ended differently, he said. You could have walked away. Malcolm shifted his stance subtly, lowering his center of gravity, preparing for the inevitable. Walking away isn't in my blood, he said quietly. Kearns' eyes narrowed. The first shot cracked through the air and the bastion exploded into violence. The smoke had long since cleared from the bastion, but Malcolm could still smell it. The phantom scent of burning betrayal clinging to the inside of his nostrils as he stood rigid beneath the gray, heavy sky. His body bore the bruises of the final confrontation. Ribs cracked from a fall, a bullet wound stitched hurriedly along his side. But it was the wounds inside that would never fully heal. Kearns had fallen, the last mask ripped away by Malcolm's relentless pursuit. The world finally forced to glimpse the rot festering beneath their illusions of safety and pride. The headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, treason at the highest levels. But the victory felt hollow, empty, as if the cost had gutted whatever justice was supposed to taste like. Today they buried Rex. The city turned out in force, a public spectacle choreographed for appearances. A performance of gratitude that could never touch the real grief coiled inside Malcolm's chest. Flags flapped limply against the coffins lined in a perfect row. But only one mattered to Malcolm. The small, solemn casket draped not in blue and silver, but in the red, black, and gold of a K9’s final honor. Malcolm stood alone at the front of the gathered crowd, his dress blues soaked by the drizzle that refused to break into full rain, his white gloves trembling slightly as he held the folded flag in his hands. An officer from the honor guard stepped forward, voice cracking slightly as he read from a citation for valor, the words blending into meaningless noise against the roar of memory inside Malcolm's mind. Rex, who had saved more lives than any plaque could ever commemorate. Rex, who had crossed battlefields of concrete and steel with nothing but loyalty anchoring his soul. Rex, who had died so Malcolm could drag the truth into the light. A general pinned a heavy medal to the center of the folded flag, hands moving with mechanical precision. For bravery above and beyond the call of duty, the general intoned. Malcolm stared at the medal, the glittering piece of metal that seemed too small, too cold to carry the weight of what had been lost. Around him, officers shifted uncomfortably, applause breaking out in fits and starts, unsure and awkward. Some meant it, most didn't know what to believe anymore. Malcolm turned slowly, flag cradled against his chest like a wound, and descended the stone steps toward the crowd. Faces blurred together, a sea of uniforms, politicians, civilians. Some weeping, some calculating their next move in a city that now knew it had been built on bones and blood. Somewhere beyond them, news cameras clicked and whirred, capturing the sanitized version of grief they would replay on the evening broadcasts. He moved through them without seeing, only feeling the weight of every step, the slow collapse of a world that could never be unbroken again. Lisa stood near the edge of the gathering, her arm in a sling, eyes shadowed but defiant, the survivor of a war that had taken too many pieces from both of them. She nodded once as Malcolm passed, an unspoken promise of solidarity in whatever future battles waited. He returned the nod, a brief, brittle thing, and pressed onward, unable to bear standing still among ghosts. And then, as he reached the periphery of the crowd, Malcolm's instincts stirred, a cold prickling at the base of his neck honed by years of danger unspoken. He scanned the faces, uniforms, suits, and mourners, and found them. A man, tall and lean, wearing a simple gray coat, his hands buried in his pockets, his face calm but his eyes sharp, assessing. The man didn't clap, didn't shift, didn't offer the hollow condolences of strangers. He watched, he waited, and when Malcolm's gaze locked onto him, the man offered the barest hint of a smile, something cold, something knowing, before turning and slipping away into the misty morning. Malcolm felt the old familiar tension coil inside him, the certainty that the battle was not over, not really. They had cut off one head of the beast, but corruption had no shortage of faces ready to step into the void. Somewhere in the endless machinery of ambition and compromise, another game was beginning, another war brewing just beyond the horizon. The man's face would be memorized, hunted, dissected in time, but not today. Today was for Rex. Malcolm walked away from the gathering without speaking, the metal heavy against his chest, the rain finally breaking into a steady, soaking fall that hid the tears he refused to wipe away. He made his way to the edge of the cemetery, where the city gave way to the wild scrubland that had once been forest, long before concrete claimed the earth. The flag carefully onto the ground, and rested his hand atop it. "Rest easy, partner," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, swallowed by the rain and the wind, and the memory of gunfire still echoing in his bones. "You did good. You did better than all of us." He stayed there long after the others had gone, after the cameras packed up and the city's machinery resumed its endless grinding forward, until only the rain remained to bear witness, a thin, steady rhythm against the hollow, broken world. In the distance, a single siren wailed, rising and falling like a lament, a song for the fallen, a reminder that the cost of truth was always paid in blood and silence. Malcolm rose slowly, his joints stiff, his uniform soaked through, but his spine straight and unbowed. He turned back toward the city, the flag and medal tucked securely beneath his arm, and began the long walk back into the heart of the beast, carrying with him the memory of loyalty that would never be forgotten, and the certainty that even in a world drowning in darkness, a single stubborn light could still burn, and burn he would. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Which part of Malcolm's journey hit you the hardest? And where are you watching or reading this from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.